Well, hey everybody, my name is Kent. I'm lead pastor here at Epic. And so all of us at all of our locations, come on, help me welcome everybody who's with us today. Big hand, yeah? Going to be a good day. All right, so for the past couple of weeks, we've been in this series called This I Know. And each week, it's been our goal to share one big idea that we think could really make a difference in your life. And we said it this way. We said, there's the things that you know, and these are the things that you think you know. And then there's the things that you know, right? And these are the things that's like, I don't just think I know them. Like, I know that I know them. And what's interesting about these things is that these are the things that you want everybody else to know, because if you had known these things a little earlier, isn't it true? They could have saved you some tears, possibly even saved you some years. So you're like, I want everybody to know about this. So we're gonna go ahead and jump into the next thing we're talking about in our series. First, I wanna tell you about our first house. My wife, Tiffany, and I, we've been married for 16 years. And for the first 14 and a half years of our marriage, we lived in the same house that we did when we first got married. And there were so many issues with this house. Like it was a mess, but it was cheap. So we just dealt with it. You know what I'm saying? You got to do that sometimes. So we just kind of rolled with it. I was like, this is fine. The first thing that was an issue was it was just small. It was so small. When people came over, I was like, I had to move stuff so they could come in. It was tough. So, people would come in. And then when I gave people a tour of the house, like we didn't even have to walk around. You could just lean from room to room. You know what I'm saying? It was like, this is the living room. This is the master bedroom. That's the kitchen. The bathroom's right there. That was the whole house. It was really, really small. So there was that. The bathroom in particular, this is funny. The house was built in the 50s. So the bathroom was covered in this pink, blue, and black tile, right? Because all those colors go together. And it was like this vintage look. And by vintage, I don't mean cool. By vintage, I mean ugly. It was just so ugly. So that was one thing. It was small. It was ugly. Another thing was the plumbing. How can I say this? The plumbing was interesting. That's the best word I can use. I kid you not. Sometimes the toilet would be like, nope, not today. You could try, but this isn't going to work out good for either one of us. So, always had to have towels on the ready. It was not a good situation, right? So the plumbing wasn't good. That was an issue. And even though this house had all of these different issues, probably the thing that was most frustrating was that whenever there was some type of a bad windstorm, our power would go out. But what's crazy is the power would go out only on our side of the street. You know what I'm saying? So you'd look across the street like, lucky? It's like, are you kidding me? Like, what's going on? And even when there was a big enough storm that everybody's power went out, their power would always come on way before our power would come on. So we just sit there in the cold, shivering to death, if it was cold outside, looking longingly at the lights across the street. Or we'd sit there sweating to death because it was hot outside, looking longingly at the lights across the street as they just kind of taunted us, Now just imagine our neighbors kind of having fun at our expense, just looking out their window and going, look at these guys. I imagine them walking over to their light switch and be like, we still got power. We still got power. Outside the street, your side of the street. Outside the street, your side of the street, That kind of, I imagine them standing in front of their refrigerator with the door open, like with not a care in the world. Whereas meanwhile, at my house, it's like opening the fridge door, that's a life and death decision. You know what I'm saying? Because we didn't know when the power was going to come back on. So if you open the fridge door when the power's off, man, the cold air's going to get out and all the food's going to spoil. So we're like, we got to get milk. It's like, oh, you sure? It's like, okay, all right, here we go. All right, it's like a two-person job. Like one person has to get the door, the next person has to like jump in, grab the milk, pull it out real fast, and hope that they get it out before you shut the door again, that kind of thing. Not a good situation. So you can imagine how frustrating it would have been having no power and then look across the street and see them with all their glorious power. Everything's fine over there. Here's what I know. Whenever you go through something difficult in life, it can be made so much more worse whenever you see that everything seems to be going fine for everyone else around you. You know what I'm saying? It's like, man, gosh, like it seems like they don't even have to pray and stuff just kind of works out for them. Whereas here I am over here on my knees like, dear God, please, do you see what's going on? Do you see what's happening? Hello, are you there? Anybody up there? You know, like I need your help. Some of you are like, I need a job or I need a better job. Others of you are like, man, I need a car or some transportation. Some of you are like, I just need a date. I just would like a date. Like, I'm not even gonna go as far as to ask for a spouse. I just need something to let me know I'm dateable. Can I help me feel a little bit better about myself right now, right? Or maybe for you it's something more serious. Maybe it would be something like, God, yeah, I need you to heal my body. Or I need you to heal my marriage. Or God, I need you to heal my heart. And you've been hoping, you've been praying, you've been wishing, but your spouse isn't changing. They don't, by the way, or I don't want to walk down that rabbit trail. Or the situation is that they're not coming back, or the situation isn't getting any better, or you're not feeling any better, or you don't have any dates and there's no prospects, on the horizon, right? Your career's not moving in the direction that you hoped it would go in. Your kids feel like they're further away, not closer to you. Like you can't even get an interview, much less a job. It's like, what is that about? And here's what I know about those type of moments or seasons in life. In those moments, it can feel like God is inattentive. It can feel like he is absolutely uncooperative. And it can feel like he's just late. You ever felt like God was late? It's like, you're late. Like it's too late. It's too broken. It's too busted. You are late. You know what I'm saying? It's like God forgot your phone number and he's not taking any of your calls. You ever been there? Yeah. Here's what I know. If you stay in a season like that long enough, it can be easy to come to some pretty unhealthy conclusions. It's in moments like those when God is unattentive or uncooperative or it feels like he's late that you can begin to think that, man, there must be something wrong with him, right? Like either he's like not good, or he's not caring, or he just doesn't exist. Like maybe that's true, right? There's gotta be something wrong with him. Or we can begin to think that there's something wrong with us. And maybe I just don't have enough faith, or I'm not doing the right things, I'm doing something wrong, or maybe somehow I made God mad, right? You start to think those things. But what we don't realize, or the conclusion that we don't come to very quickly sometimes, is that sometimes hardship and pain and struggle and difficult circumstances, sometimes they're just part of life. And those are things, that is something that none of us gets to completely avoid altogether. Like hardship and pain and struggle, those are just things that sometimes they're just part of life. Look at me, there's definitely nothing wrong with God. And there's absolutely probably nothing wrong with you sometimes. And I realize that for some of you, this is a whole new category, this is a whole new thought. Sometimes hardship, pain, difficult season in life is just part of life. Sometimes going through something isn't because of a lack of faith on your part. And it's not because of a lack of goodness on God's part. Sometimes a difficult season in your life is just part of life. And here's what I know about those things. You're either in one, you're coming out of one, or you're heading straight toward one. And I'm not trying to be like, why are you so negative today, Kent? What is that about? No, that's just true. And it's just true, like real talk. Like it's just true. We're gonna go through some stuff in life. And so today I wanna talk with you about something that you need to know for the next time that you go through something like that. And here it is. Here's the thing that I know. This I know, nothing is wasted. This I know, nothing is wasted. No pain or heartache or failure is wasted. No mistake or tragedy or mishap is wasted. No struggle or hardship or delay that you endured is wasted. No trial or mountain that you faced or tear has been wasted. Not one loss that you've had along the way is wasted. Not the boring moments or the painful moments or the messed up moments. None of those are wasted. No, with God, nothing is wasted. And his promise to you and his promise to me is that if we would look hard enough, or if we would stick around long enough to look in hindsight, there's purpose that can be found in every problem. This I know. With God, nothing, absolutely no thing is wasted. And this shouldn't be as much of a surprise to us as I think it can be, because if you think about it, this is exactly what we see in creation. It's exactly what we see in nature. Nothing is wasted. For example, in creation, there are animals or herds that graze, and then after they graze, they defecate, right? Or in the case of my puppy, he goes potty, right? He go potty, right? That's what they do. And when that happens, there's waste that happens as a result that's there on the ground. But that waste becomes fertilizer. And over time, it replenishes the soil. And we see in nature that nothing is wasted. Those animals are then forced to move to another area to graze, not because they want to, but because of predators. And those predators are really important, because if it weren't for the predators, then those herds would just stay where they are, and they would eat where they defecate, which would lead to disease and cause all kinds of problems. And so we see that even the predator has a purpose, because nothing is wasted. And then whenever that animal dies, all the insects come and they feed off of the carcass. Why? Because nothing is wasted. And even if that didn't happen, eventually the body would decompose, which again replenishes the soil, and we see that nothing is wasted. And I think that is part of God's intention, not just for creation, not just for nature, but I think that's part of God's creation in our lives as well, that nothing would be wasted. So I want to show you this from actually the life of Moses. It's over in the book of Acts chapter 7. And this, what we're going to read through today, is actually a sermon. It's actually a sermon by a guy named Stephen. And Stephen is preaching, and it's really interesting because at the end of this sermon, they actually kill Stephen. They kill him. That's what happens. And so I'm going to try real hard to avoid whatever mistakes he made, and you don't get any funny ideas for the end of this one, all right? And so I'm going to read this to you, and we're going to kind of pull some stuff out along the way from the life of Moses. And the reason why we're talking about Moses is because Moses is the perfect example of how nothing is wasted. How nothing is wasted, because this is a guy whose life got off to a pretty rough start. And not just that, his middle was pretty rough too. But then all of a sudden, his story takes a turn, and you see that it ends in extraordinary fashion. So here we go, Acts chapter 7, starting in verse number 20. Here's what Stephen said. This is his sermon. He said this. He says, at that time, Moses was born. And whenever Stephen said at that time Moses was born, what he was saying was at the worst time, like at a terrible time. He was like, hey, remember when Moses was born? Whew, it was not a good time to be born. That's what he's saying. It was not a good time. It was the worst time to be born. And it was not a good time to be born because Pharaoh, who was the ruler of Egypt at the time, he was oppressing the Hebrews. And in fact, he was worried about the number of Hebrews growing and getting larger and larger and larger. And so he actually set out a decree. He made this command for every newborn Hebrew boy to be killed, because he wanted to keep the numbers down. And so it was at that time that Stephen says Moses was born. I got a question. You ever felt like you were just kind of had gotten off to a bad start? You know what I'm saying? Like not just for the day, but like in life. It's like I just didn't get off to a good start. Like where I came from, the way this kind of happened, it just wasn't good. You ever look at where you came from and think, that's not good. Like it's not very hopeful. You ever wonder why you were born where you were born, or why you had the parents that you had, or why you were from the side of the tracks that you were from, or why you were born with the challenges that you were born with? Listen, you may not like those things about you, but I'm telling you, with God, nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted. That's what we'll see play out in Moses' life. It goes on, he says this, he says, at that time Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. Now, I don't think this means that Moses was particularly handsome as a kid, right? Or particularly good looking. No, Moses probably looked just like every other kid, just not that special, you know? Now, don't get me wrong, I love babies. I think babies are awesome, but let's be honest, they aren't always so cute. That's true, not every baby is all that cute, right? It's not like with other animals, like for instance, like baby horses. When baby horses are born, they're just cute, right? They're beautiful even. Baby horses are incredible. Here's another one. Puppies are adorable. You're just like, oh my gosh, look at that puppy, right? Cute. All right, kittens, evil as they are, kittens. As much as I despise them, they're still cute, right? Why? Because they're like, meow. Like that little thing or something about meow. You're just like, oh. Like, how can you not like a kitten, right? Baby elephants. Aren't baby elephants the best? Baby elephants are like these perfectly proportioned miniature elephants. It's like there's a big elephant and it's like, it's like a small one of that. Like that's an amazing thing. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. But then humans, the wheels kind of come off. Right, but come on, let's face it. It's like, you look, and I know this because I've had 3 of them. I've had 3 of these little babies, and they're just like one big kind of misshapen head and then some unwieldy appendages, and you're like, what? What is this thing? How come it can't be cute like the elephant? Like, what is this thing that I got right here, you know? Really, think about this for a second. If you took like the elephant principle, if you took a baby and you kept it the exact same proportions into adulthood, that's an alien is what that is. You'd run for your life. You'd be like, ah! What is that? No, it's a scary thing. I'm just saying. So babies, no, not always that cute. But when Stephen says this is no ordinary child talking about Moses, he's not talking about how handsome he was. What he is saying this is he's saying, hey, as I take a long view at Moses' life, and I start at the end and go all the way back to the beginning, the only way he could sum it up is to say this was no ordinary child. Like what happened in this man's life, this is just no ordinary thing. And then he continues here. Here's what he says next. He says, for 3 months, he was cared for by his family. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. So here's what you need to know. So I'm filling some blanks here. Moses only lived under the protection of his parents for 3 months. That's it. For 3 months. And then at the end of those 3 months, they actually took him and they put him in a basket and they pushed him down the Nile River. And they did that chancing that he would either drown at 3 months old or possibly even be eaten by the crocodiles in the Nile. But they did that because that was safer than keeping him in their home where the Egyptian soldiers would come and kill him. Remember that thing that the Pharaoh said? And so they put him in this basket and they float him down the Nile River. And it says that Pharaoh's daughter actually finds him. She pulls him up out of the river and she decides to raise him as her own son, right? Hey, man, stroke of luck. That's a pretty cool thing, right? God had all that designed. Well, it turns out not only that, she actually hires Moses' mother to be his nanny. Right? You think your family's kind of messed up. Like, that's a thing. It's like, what is going on? Weird twist of fate there. I read these verses here, and what stood out to me is when he was placed outside. And that got me thinking. I was like, gosh, man, that's interesting because I know that that's how probably many of you feel. Right? Because of the circumstances that surrounded how your story started, you felt your whole life that you were just kind of placed outside. You felt your whole life that you've just been on the outside looking in. Maybe it's because of the color of your skin. Maybe it's because of where you came from. Maybe it's because of some of the circumstances that happened in your life that you had no control over as a child. And so because of it, as an adult, you carry around a bunch of wounds and scars, and you're just broken. You feel damaged. And if that's you, I just want you to know that with God, nothing is wasted. And so with every wound that you carry and every scar that you bear, and with every experience that has stayed with you like a nightmare, even though it's just a memory, you've got to know that with God, nothing, not even that thing, is wasted. None of the pain in your past, none of the pain from how your story began, none of that will be wasted. Verse 22, it says, so Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. Now, if you know the rest of Moses' story, you know that he doesn't grow up to ultimately become an Egyptian. And so you can read this verse and you can think to yourself, what a waste. Like his entire education, he was educated in the wisdom of the Egyptians. His entire education was for something that he didn't even grow up to become. Does that sound familiar for anybody? Right? Went to college, you're like, I got this degree. Now you look at what you're doing now and you're like, it has nothing to do with what I went to school for. Are you kidding me? What a waste, right? Like if you knew then what you know now, you never would have taken the classes that you took. You never would have chosen the major that you chose. You never would have wasted all the time and energy and money that you did chasing that one specific degree. Are you kidding me? What a waste. You ever look back at your life and think, man, I don't think God was planning ahead. It's like, I don't think he was thinking ahead because man, if I would have known what I was going to be doing, what I was going to actually be doing, then I would have prepared in a completely different way than how I prepared. But even though you think that, I'm telling you, with God, nothing is wasted. And so not only will he use every wound that you've picked up along the way, but he'll use all the information and every skill that you've learned along the way as well. Every experience that you've had, whether that's in a classroom or outside of a classroom, because there's more than one way to get an education. No matter what that is for you, you need to know that with God, none of it is wasted. None of your education, none of the lessons that you've learned along the way, none of your past is wasted because with God, nothing is wasted. Verse 23 says, when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, and so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Moses thought that that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them. And it says, but they did not. So at 40 years old, Moses decides to go visit like his kinfolk, to go visit the people from which he came. And so he goes to visit them. And it's interesting. You're tempted whenever you read the Bible to think that all the good guys always did the right thing, but they didn't. And it's because they're not. Like they're not good guys as much as they're just guys trying to do some good things. Sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they don't. And here we see that Moses, he doesn't get it right. Moses walks up on an Egyptian and sees this man mistreating a Hebrew slave. And then something really bad happens. How bad? Like first-degree murder. Bad. Like it is not a good situation. Like you've made some mistakes in your life, but this one, oof, it's a big mistake. I mean, think about it. What he could have done. I mean, Moses had all kinds of options in this moment. Like when he saw this happening, when he saw this Egyptian man mistreating this Hebrew, he could have walked up and he could have commanded him, hey, stop it. By the way, I'm Pharaoh's son. He would have stopped. He could have leveraged his power to fix the situation. He could have intervened. He could have jumped in and said, no. He could have modeled for the guy how he should treat the Hebrew slave, but he didn't. Instead, he killed a man. And he actually thought that they would agree with him that was the right thing to do, that they would see him as someone that God was using to rescue the Hebrew people. But remember what it says. It says that they did not. And the reason why they didn't is because in that moment when he killed that Egyptian, he wasn't reflecting God's character. He was reflecting Pharaoh's character, his dad. And so they're like, And what I think is so interesting about that is that, yeah, God eventually would use Moses to deliver his people, to rescue his people. Like he got the what right, but he got the how and he got the time wrong. Like those two things were totally wrong. And I just think it's really interesting that really the lesson you learn from this little part of his story is that he needed to wait. And listen, a season of waiting is never a season wasted. Because sometimes God needs to do something in you before he ever does something for you or through you. That's an important thing. Verse 26, here's what happens. It says, the next day Moses came up on 2 Israelites who were fighting, and he tried to reconcile them by saying, men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? But the man who was mistreating the others pushed Moses aside and said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me like you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" Uh-oh. Isn't it interesting that yesterday it was so easy for Moses to kill a man for mistreating someone, but then today the same thing happens and all of a sudden he finds all kinds of restraint? Like, what's that about? What's the difference between those two scenarios? You know what I think it is? It's how he saw the person. See, the day before, he saw the Egyptian as his enemy. So he killed him. But today, he saw his Hebrew relative as his brother. And so he's shown kindness. And I think there's a lesson to be learned here, particularly in the times that we live. Because as long as we see things as us versus them, as long as we see things as white versus black, as long as we see things as Democrat versus Republican, there's always going to be room for violence and hate. But the moment we see things as, or we see each other as we, as brother and sister, that's when there's room for peace. That's when there's room for kindness. Verse 29 says this, it says, when Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. Now this is how we know that Moses knew what he did was wrong, because he ran, right? It's like when you act a little shady, you're like, oh, you know what you did, right? So we know that Moses knew what he did was wrong because he ran. At 40 years old, and just let that sink in for a second, right? 40, Moses makes such a big mistake that it would impact the rest of his life. I mean, come on. At 40, you're supposed to be done making those kinds of mistakes, aren't you? At 40, I can understand if he was 20. It's like, oh, he's 20. They do dumb stuff. Their brain isn't even developed yet. But 40? Are you serious? Like, you're still, like, shouldn't you have it all together by then? Who does that? You know who does that? You does that. You know who else does that? I does that. We does that. And then it says that he settled as a foreigner. He had to leave. He had to walk out in the wilderness. And get this, he was there for 40 years. Now, it's important that it says that he settled as a foreigner, because I think that's the temptation that all of us face whenever we've made some mistakes in our own life. We're tempted to settle for less than the life that God planned for us. We're tempted to settle and just accept that we did what we did, we are who we are, and it just is what it is, so leave me alone. And what's sad is that, what's tragic about that is there's no hope in that. Like, there's no hope for the future in that. It's like you used to be a person that dreamed about what could be. You used to be a person that really lived. Now you just exist. Like, you're okay just existing. And it's the saddest thing in the world that we would let the mistakes of our past rob us from living and just allow us to just settle for existing. So at 40 years old, when he should have known better, Moses kills a guy, runs for his life, and he settles for the next 40 years of his life. Think about that. He messed up his middle. Like, he messed it up. But even in that, what we're going to see is that nothing is wasted. It's interesting because I think what he did defined him. I think he let it define him. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but Moses never killed anybody else, right? And Moses, it wasn't a pattern in his life. He wasn't a killer, though he did kill someone. He wasn't a killer. And sometimes I don't know if you know this, but aren't we tempted to define people by their worst moment? Right? If someone lies, so they are a liar. And someone steals something, and so they are a thief. Right? And we don't want anybody to do that to us. I mean, think about that for a second. What would you be? If you were defined by your worst moment, what would you be? But we'll do that to somebody else in a minute. I think Moses did that to himself. I think he knew what he did, and it defined who he was, right? He let that worst moment define his future. But you know what you need to know? God never does that. God would never do that, and God never does do that. He never defines a person by their worst moment. And he never sees their failure as something that's fatal. Like he never looks at your failure and says, oh, you'll never come back from that. No. God doesn't do that. Why? Because with God, nothing is wasted. Even your failures. Even your failures. So Moses fails in spectacular fashion. And he settled. He settled. He stopped pursuing the life that God had for him because he let what he did determine what he would do. And he allowed the mistakes of his past to inform how he saw his future. Look at me. I don't care how many times you fail. You are not a failure. Yeah, you may have failed. That's what you did, but that is not who you are. You are not a failure. Stop allowing the labels from your past to limit your future. Don't do that. Listen, the failures of your past, the mistake that you've made along the way, you might see those as a waste. I mean, think about that. Come on, think about some spring breaks. What a waste. You know what I'm saying? That trip to Cancun, what a waste, right? Man, the way you've done, I mean, what a waste. You might see that stuff as waste, but I'm telling you, it's not a waste, it's fertilizer. Like, yeah, it stinks. Yeah, it wasn't great, but with God, nothing is wasted. And one day, I believe as you follow him, you'll see the flowers bloom. You'll see the flowers bloom. You see, it's the fertilizer in life that God uses to grow new things in us. Remember, nothing is wasted. None of your failures, none of your mistakes, nothing is wasted. Verse 30. It says, after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. When he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. I bet he was. As he went over to get a closer look, I'm like, you're crazy. He heard the Lord say, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses trembled with fear and did not dare look. Then the Lord said to him, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. The place where you're standing is holy ground. I have indeed seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their groaning and have come down to set them free. Now come, I will send you back to Egypt. Did you do the math? Moses is 80 years old now. He's 80 years old, and he has this incredible encounter with God. There's this bush that's on fire, but it doesn't burn up. Like he had to be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so old, I'm seeing stuff. And then he heard the bush speak, and he had to be like, oh, that's it. They are putting me in a home. Like, this is my last day here. I am going to the home. What I love about this part of the story is that even when Moses was 80 years old, even when he kind of figured he essentially had 1 foot in the grave, God's still at work in his life. Listen, think about this. When you're 80, you don't look to your next birthday. You're looking to make it till Wednesday, because that's when your shows come on, right? Like that's... And at this point in his life, it would be so easy to believe that whatever usefulness he had left had probably run out in his 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s. I mean, all of these years, from his 40s to his 80th birthday, all he did was settle. He just settled. What a waste. 40 good years of his life gone. But God says, no, because nothing is wasted. Remember? Moses, if you're not dead, you're not done. I got something for you to do. Verse 35. This is the same Moses. I love that. Because this is the same Moses that had that broken, busted childhood. This is the same Moses whose education was essentially wasted. This is that same Moses who made all those mistakes and messed up his middle. This is the same Moses that killed a man. This is the same Moses who wasted 40 years of his life settling for less. 40 years. This is the same Moses who spent 40 years of his life running from God. He goes on and says, this is the same Moses they had rejected with the words, "Who made you ruler and judge?" He was sent to be the ruler and deliverer by God himself through the angel who appeared to him in the bush. God still had a plan. Verse 36, he, being 80-year-old Moses, look what he did. He led them out of Egypt. He performed wonders and signs in Egypt at the Red Sea. Remember that thing? Yeah, he split it. And for 40 years in the wilderness, like he led them, 37. This is the Moses who told the Israelites, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your own people. You see, what was about to happen here was that God was going to use Moses to lead his people out of slavery and out of captivity and into the wilderness for the next 40 years. What's interesting is if you read the story, you discover that the people were afraid after 4 days. Can you imagine how they might have felt if they knew this was gonna last longer than just 4 days or 40 days or 4 months or 4 years? Can you imagine how they would have responded if they realized that they were gonna wander in the wilderness for the next 40 years? They had to be like, they would have been like, no one knows how to survive the wilderness for 40 years. Do they? Like, who knows how to survive in the wilderness for 40 years? Who knows how to do that? Remember those 40 years that Moses spent running? That he thought were wasted? All those years that he was running, they weren't wasted. No, God was using those 40 years to teach him how to survive 40 years in the wilderness so that one day he could lead his people through that same wilderness for 40 years. They were afraid. Moses, what do we do? Moses is like, move over, I got this. I've been here before. I've walked down this road. I've been down this path. I thought those 40 years were wasted, but this I know. With God, nothing is wasted. Not my past, not my education, not my mistakes, not even the wasted years. Nothing. This I know. With God, no thing is wasted. Let me tell you how I know this is true. Because I lived it. Now, I've told you before about how 10 years ago, before we went to start the church, how God used one guy in particular to miraculously give us $60,000 to help start the church. And I told you that story, but I haven't told you very often why he did that. About 4 years after we kind of got things going, I finally got the guts to ask him, because really, essentially, giving me $60,000 to start a church back then with no track record was just a good way to lose $60,000. That's all it was. It was like, we're gonna spend it, it's gonna be gone, and then we're done, basically, is how that works. So I asked the guy, I was like, hey, why'd you give us $60,000? Like, I know you prayed, I know that was a thing, but was there anything else? And then here's what he said, let me back up a little bit. When I left, I was actually on staff at a church out in the suburbs. And when I told the church, I told the pastor, I said, hey, I feel like God's calling us to go start a church in the city, and I'm gonna leave to go do that. It didn't go over well. It wasn't a good situation. And essentially, I was asked to sign a non-compete, right? For the business people, you know what that is. And I'm like, at church? Like a non-compete? You want me to sign that thing? A non-compete, there's a radius, and like, I'm like, are you, what? What is that about? And not just that, it was like, there was like a severance involved, and so I was like, I didn't sign it, so I didn't get a severance. So me and my 8-week-old child and my wife had nothing, paying our own insurance, like nothing. And not just that, here's how the thing went down at church. They brought me up one Sunday after being there for 7.5 years, and they said, this is Kent's last Sunday. He's decided to further his career. That was it. And then they were done. You know what happens when a pastor is there for a long time and then one Sunday out of the blue, it's his last Sunday and he's never there again? You know what people think? Moral failure. Oh, he did something with somebody. Ooh, he stole something from somewhere. All of a sudden, my character was assassinated. And I threw a pity party. I was like, what? Why me? All I've ever done is be faithful. All I've ever done is put blood, sweat, and tears and moving this thing forward. All I've ever done is give my absolute best. Are you kidding me? All these people think this crazy stuff, and I can't even, and here's another thing, I couldn't tell people where I was going. Where are you going? I was like, Couldn't even tell people where I was going. I was like, this isn't fair, this isn't right. Why me? You know the hardest thing about starting our church is leaving the old one. So I asked the guy. He gave us $60,000. I was like, hey, that was a bad idea. Why'd you do that? He says, I heard someone tried to get you to sign a non-compete. And I thought to myself, that shouldn't happen in church. He's a business guy. He's like, that shouldn't happen in church. And then he said this. He says, you know what? If that church won't help him, I'll help him. And God used the exact scenario, the very thing that I thought was the most harmful to me, to be the thing that was the most helpful to me. God used the exact thing that I thought was my greatest burden and turned it into what eventually would be my greatest blessing. It wasn't waste, it was fertilizer. And my, oh my, have the flowers bloomed. Are you kidding me? So this I know. With God, nothing is wasted. Nothing. That thing that you think is unfair, it's not wasted. That thing you think shouldn't be, it's not wasted. That thing that you can't understand why, it's not wasted. With God, nothing is wasted. I believe God's got a great plan for your life. So no matter what happens and no matter what has happened, God can use it for good. I mean, think about this one way. Who better to walk through life with someone who's going through a terrible divorce than someone who's been through one themselves? And who better to go through, or who better to walk with somebody who came from a less than stellar childhood than someone who came from one themselves? And who better to come alongside someone who's messed up their middle than someone who's messed it up themselves? And that's just one way that God can use the things that we don't understand for good. That's just one way that he can do that. And so here's maybe a takeaway, right? You gotta know that nothing is wasted. Even that thing, even this thing, nothing's wasted. But beyond that, I think that there are some of you here today that, when I talk about, when I say with God, you wouldn't necessarily put yourself in that category of being with God. It's like, I don't even know if that's a thing. I'm kind of with me and my crew. Like with God, that's a little much, Ken. I get that. And my hope is that one day you'll step across the line of faith and discover that you were created in the very beginning to be with him all along. And that life is just better that way. It really is. And there might be some of you that you'd say, yeah, today, like today's the day that I think I want to step across the line of faith and ask Jesus to be the forgiver of my sin and leader of my life. Like, forgiver of your sin, because he's the only one that can do that. That's a God-sized job. Leader of your life, because, well, we've all tried to do that, and we kind of suck at it. So that's his job too. We need him to be both of those things. So if that's you, if that's where you're at, you're like, yeah, I would like to be with God. You can do that. You can take that step. Two things I want you to do. One, I want you to check on your connection card. On the back, there's a line that says, I'm making a decision today to follow Jesus. Check that box. Then we'll be able to send you some information to help you take the next step. We'll contact you and all that kind of stuff. Two, I want you to check that box. The second thing for me, because I want to be praying for you, all right? Most important decision you'll ever make is to finally say, all right, God, I want to follow you. So check that box. We'll make sure we're praying for you and do that. Others of you, I want to say this. Others of you, maybe you're already a follower of Jesus. I think that's great. Man, I hope today just reminded you that nothing is wasted, not even that thing. And so in just a moment, we're gonna sing a song. And it's a song that reminds us that nothing is wasted. But as you do, man, for those of you that look around at some areas of your life and you're like, I just can't make sense of that. For those of you that went through something, you're like, it wasn't cool when I was let go. It wasn't okay when I was let down. For those of you that have gone through periods where you got some news that made your hopes come crashing down, right? For those of you that have gone through stuff where you were betrayed by someone, or you've gone through a season of life where your prayers weren't answered, or you've gone through something where you just couldn't make sense of what was happening around you. Man, whatever area of your life where it feels like God has just left the building, here's what I want to say to you. One day, you're going to be able to stand and say, this I know. With God, nothing was wasted. And not even for a moment was I ever forsaken. He's good. He's always been good. He'll always be good. And I can trust him.